Hello and welcome to Daddy's Sex Talk podcast. I'm Daddy Rob, and on this show we talk about gay male sex and sexuality. And we just did a YouTube video on what gay isn't, or the myths around gay male sexuality. I suggest you check that out. And today on the podcast, we're having an interview with the daddy of Daddy Rob, or my father, my biological father. Can you believe it? So on today's show, we will get to know a little about him and talk about what it is to be a father of a gay son. Hey, Dad, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure. Since it is a podcast about gay men, the obvious question to start with is, when did you know you were straight?
I don't believe there was ever a question in my mind whether I was straight or gay. I just lived my life, I guess.
Yeah, I'd initially intended that as a joke question, but the more I thought about it, I was remembering a conversation that I had with my mother, your wife, and not to go too deep into the weeds. When I was in high school, we were born-again Catholic Christians, and we went to a prayer group meeting every week. I believe it was every week. I want to say it was on Tuesday nights. We would go,
Yes.
and it was you, Mom, and I have a younger sister who did not go to these meetings. But I remember at one point sharing during a meeting that I had been struggling with my sexuality, that I had thought maybe I was gay or bisexual, but that through the grace of God, I had discovered that I actually was straight and everything was okay. And I remember having a conversation with my mother a few days later when we were waiting to pick up my sister from school. We were sitting in the car, and she had said, just so you know, it's not uncommon for young men or boys to wonder about their sexuality, and it's that common idea for a lot of parents that homosexuality may be a phase for their child. So that, bearing that in mind, I mean, was that an experience that you had growing up, or at some point something happened in your life where you questioned your sexuality, or had it always been just an assumption of yours throughout your life that you were heterosexual?
No, I never questioned it once. Never remember questioning at all.
See, I knew it. I've had this conversation with friends that when people talk about the fact that like every boy goes through this phase, it's possible that there may be a point when a boy is like idolizing like a sports figure or an action star or something, just this very masculine presence, where for a moment they may be like, oh, he's very attractive, and then they're like, oh my God, I just had a gay thought, and so I might be struggling with my sexuality, but no, I'm straight because I like Scarlett Johansson or whoever the actress is at the time. That it's not actually struggling with your sexuality. But I can see where for like a heterosexual child to have any kind of thought that goes against like that, our ideal of masculinity, that it may appear to be a struggle, or at least for a moment. And what I've said to friends is, I don't think that these straight guys who have had this thought at some point in their past understand what it is to carry the weight of homosexuality for a truly gay person, where it's a day in, day out struggle with it, particularly when you're living in a society that is heteronormative, or that centers heterosexuality as the preferred state, where your identity goes up in opposition to that. So I don't think when they're talking about, 'cause I've heard politicians talk about it as well, that it's, this choice thing, assuming that at some point we've all faced this choice, and I don't think that's true. But, and I recognize your story is just your story, but I mean, do you have any kind of sense of any of your peers? I mean, was there ever any kind of conversation? I guess maybe a better place to start with this is, before you had a son who came out, what was your understanding of what it was to be a gay person? Because there was some judgment there at some point about what that was.
Yeah. The only thing I remember is talking about it after the AIDS epidemic. And it was like they brought it upon themselves. They are open. They have no morals. and free sex. That's about all that was ever talked about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that that's probably I know you, and I know that's a thought that you've evolved with, but it's not an uncommon thought for the general public to have, particularly around the topic of HIV/AIDS. In fact, even in now 2021, there's still this concept that ties homosexuality to HIV/AIDS as if they go hand in hand, whereas we know now that it's not just this one particular community that is facing HIV/AIDS. In fact, I was just looking at the statistics from 2018 of all U.S. HIV/AIDS cases that came up during that year. 81% of those were men. And of course, 81% of those were men, or maybe not of course, but 81% of those were men who have sex with men, and that's how they contracted it. What I thought was interesting in that is that 10% of men who contracted HIV contracted it through heterosexual or male-female sex of some sort, and 5% were intravenous drug needles. So it was twice as likely to get HIV from a heterosexual experience than it was from IV drug use. And I remember that when this originally was coming up in the media, it was like those gay people and drug users are the ones driving the epidemic. And what's also a sad part of that is that in 2018, anyway, the largest group of people who were getting HIV/AIDS was the mid-20s. So you're talking about that period of life where your decision making is impaired by youth. You don't think about consequences, and my fear is that there are still a lot of heterosexual children who aren't getting that message about protecting yourself sexually because their parents, heterosexual parents who haven't really had to think about it, didn't think to teach their children about protecting themselves that way. Like if they knew they had a gay son, they might have that conversation with them, but heterosexual children somehow don't need that talk. And I think it's obvious that we need to have that conversation with all of our children about protecting yourself sexually and stop avoiding the topic of sex entirely. It is also interesting to know that for sex education, most children, when they were surveyed in college and talk about the sex education they got when they were younger, they predominantly hear about the negatives of sex. They predominantly hear about STDs, and most often about HIV, because that for a lot of parents is the biggest concern, is that their children will die of something, so they'll tell them about that. But that means that the primary sex messaging that our children get is like this negative view of sexology. It's sex negative. They come into the world sex negative. So there's a lot of fear around sex and a lot of hesitancy to talk about it because of that fear. But yeah, anyway. But as far as your personal relationships or your realm of understanding of gay men, before you had a son who came out, who were the people, was there anybody in your life that you knew that was gay, and what was your response to that knowledge?
I had a friend in the service who was gay, and he kept it hidden while he was in there, of course. That would have been an immediate dishonorable discharge. So we hung around together and had a good time, and I really liked him. And we split up after basic training, and he went to Fort Hood, Texas, and I went to San Antonio, Texas. Can't remember the name of the fort right offhand, but anyway, we met on the weekends a couple of times. Went to Houston, was halfway. Got on a bus, and we'd meet there and go out on the town, and never knew. He was a pretty husky guy, and it just never dawned on me that he was homosexual. Then after we got out of the military, he lived in Springfield, Illinois, where I'm from, and he called me up, "Hey, you're out now. You want to get together?" "Sure, yeah." So we went out, and he made a pass at me, and I said, "What are you doing?" And he said, well, I didn't know if you were straight or gay. And he said, I don't know if homosexual, gay wasn't used then. And I said, no, I'm not homosexual. And he said, okay. He said, I'm fine with that. I was attracted to you, and I know now how you stand. And that was the end of that. We still went out, and I liked him, still liked him. And I never thought about his homosexuality, I guess. That was who he was. And I accepted who he was.
That's a pretty evolved kind of response to have. I mean, when I think of what's been put out as the stereotypical response from gay men if they have or straight men when they've had passes from gay men is, I mean, to a violent degree. And even if it wasn't violent, it pretty much meant the end of that relationship. So was it the fact that you had such a positive experience with your friendship with him that was something you could look over, or was there that you could overlook, or was it something else?
No, that was it. You hit it right on the nose, because I experienced later on when we were in Des Moines with friends walking down the street, and we went by a gay bar, and they started whistling and saying things, and I was offended, and because I felt like I was on the spot with my friends. So, I had to say something like all those queers or something like that, and went on. But yeah, I wanted to fit into society. I didn't want to be labeled anything, and that I wasn't homosexual, and I was not going to let them think I was. So, but they all had a big laugh about that somebody made a pass at me on the street. So.
Well, that's interesting, because that gives you at least a unique perspective from me on what that experience is. My assumption to this point has been that reaction is elicited because it seems to be an insult to your masculinity, as if, and I think it ties into these schoolyard taunts of gay, fag, or faggot. It's the terminology that's used to gatekeep masculinity, like keep boys from wandering outside of masculinity. Anytime you do something that would be considered not how you're supposed to be as a man, you get called these names, or you get beat up, or there's something to try to herd you back into that thought structure. So you're effectively brainwashed into masculinity. This is the way that I have to be. And if there's any questioning of it, it needs to be addressed in a very violent and direct manner. And violence isn't just physical violence. It's words like queer. It's words that put people back into their place. And I mean, was that I don't want to assume too much, but was that the instinctual reaction? Was it driven by they've somehow impugned your manhood by suggesting that?
Yeah, that's part of it. And I was thinking as you were talking, we never talked about homosexuals. Church never. And I went through a grade school in Catholic schools, and part of my high school. Went to church. It was never brought up. Homosexuality was never brought up. It was never brought up in the home. So what I learned was from other guys and just on the street. So, yeah, that's basically how I formed my opinion, is on the street, and that's not a good place to learn. I found out later.
But that's primarily where most of us learn. I mean, from the street, from our friends. I mean, they have more influence than our parents do at a certain point. I mean, because we know we're eventually going to be leaving our parents' homes and have to fit into whatever the society is that's outside of that. So they become more and more influential the closer we come to adulthood. And that is part of having a privileged identity, is that it's not commented on, that you won't hear yourself talked about in public spaces or in even your own home. Unless everybody else shares that identity, what's talked about is whatever the dominant identity is. And then that is normalized. And you get this kind of message that anything that falls outside of that is unnatural or abnormal. So you don't actually have to say something's wrong to know it's wrong. You just have to never have heard about that and recognize that it's kind of an aberration from whatever is normal. And everybody wants to be normal.
Right.
That's our common drive is we don't want to stand out. We want to be protected by the tribe, and in order to be protected by the tribe, we have to be like the rest of the tribe. And once you're kicked out of one tribe, then you have to find another tribe that's going to protect you. And fortunately, a lot of gay men are able to do that once they leave their family of origin. They find a family of choice that will take them in and provide them the protection that their family can't or couldn't do. So as far as your personal journey, then you're talking about having this one pivotal friendship that he was gay, or like you said, gay is a more relatively new term. In fact, there was a point where people weren't even called homosexuals. They had homosexual behavior. There was a homosexual tendency. It was a mental health issue before 1973. 1973, the American Psychiatric Association said this is no longer a psychiatric problem, which coincided with the free sex and the sexual revolution. There was a lot of movement to expand our idea of sexuality, and then HIV hits in the 80s. And all of a sudden there is a lot of conversation about gay men, and it's very, very negative. And everybody's very clear on when you're talking about a gay man, what one is at that point. So as far as not having homosexuality as part of the conversation, then it was primarily, I would imagine, growing up, instead of it being what's gay and what's not gay, it's what's a sissy and what isn't. What's a real man.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I called people that weren't very manly sissies. You're being a sissy. Yeah.
And that has, and just like with the way a lot of gay men are viewed now, there's a lot of tie into misogyny. It is this idea of the transcendence of the very specifically the straight white man and the straight white man of privilege or financial privilege, middle class and up. That's the centered person in our society. In fact, anytime you talk about politics, it's middle class. So straight white male, middle class, and anything that doesn't fall into that category is somehow relegated to the crumbs that group leaves behind. And so everybody on a certain degree wants to be a part of that group. And some people have a more difficult time of doing it than others. Did you feel... particularly nowadays when we talk about privilege, was there any kind of understanding that was a privileged position for you growing up? I mean, not that you were in it. I don't think that your family would be what you would call traditional middle class. They may have been like lower middle class or upper lower class. I don't know where you would put them in that.
Yeah, I'd say, lower middle class, right?
Yeah, so that would have been the only thing I would know about you that would have been keeping you out of that particular chosen people. So was that something that you recognized as not that missing out on that privilege?
No. I was a typical boy, played Army, stuff like that. We didn't play with dowels, anything like that. That would have been a taboo for sure. Yeah.
Were there things that you recall reinforcing that masculinity from either your father or your male peer group? Was there anything that, looking back on it, you're like, I may have been displaying some too much sensitivity around something, or getting into something or doing something that you were somehow taught out of by either your father or male peers?
No, I was, like I said, I was all boy. I loved sports, and I played hard, played baseball, football, the whole thing, and played organized sports. So, yeah, I was what I would think a typical boy. That's what I felt like, and never crossed my mind anything else other than heterosexual.
So you didn't question the definition that was put out as masculinity. It just felt comfortable to you, and then there was never any kind of struggle against that particular identity.
No.
All right, so let's fast forward then. So that's your understanding of masculinity. It's your understanding of a boy's place in the world. What's a typical boy? Oh, well, one more question then. As far as something that's not considered a traditional masculinity, were there any artistic or intellectual pursuits that that intrigued you when you were younger? I mean, outside of the typical masculinity of the sports and shop and all that kind of manly pursuits, was there anything that would have been considered a softer side of you as a when you were growing up?
Not really. No. Nothing. My recollection. I'm thinking back, trying to come up with something. No. I don't think of anything. I just love sports. I was always, like I said, roughneck. So, yeah.
All right. So then again, to fast forward, when you are 24, your wife gives birth to your first child.
She was
Me.
younger than that.
23,
Way back.
22.
How about 19?
You were 19?
No. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant her.
No.
No. Yes, I would have been 21, 22, 22.
22. Okay. So when you're 22, your wife gives birth to your first child, who's a male child, me, and you name him after yourself.
Right.
You and your wife name him after yourself.
Right.
What was the experience of having a male child that was, I mean, was there a point where the mold was being followed and then it broke off? Was there, because I was not an athletic
No.
child. I was not into mechanical stuff, any of the stereotypical masculine stuff. I don't recall ever, and there may have been a point where I was and veered off. But what is that experience like of trying to parent a male child that doesn't display the stereotypical masculine pursuits?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, you were never wanting to get into sports, and I never really had a problem with it. Maybe it's because you were my son. I'm just sitting here thinking about it. I've never thought about it before. I always thought you as an academic, not as somebody who liked physical stuff, and that was fine with me. I had no problem with that. Like I said, maybe it was because you were my son. I have no way of knowing for sure, but yeah, I never had a problem.
There's a lot of conversation, particularly in heterosexual psychology, about the bonding between a father and a son. That masculine bonding is the idea of that the father has a recognition, particularly with their oldest son, that they are somehow handing the world over to their son. And it may be that they're handing over a profession, that they're handing over an ideology, that they're handing over, you know, the values. There's something that they are leaving to the next generation through that masculine child. It's almost like a carbon copy, but improved. It's like I'm going to invest something in this man that I will, will hopefully continue to influence the world even after I'm gone. So how do you forge that connection when that expression of masculinity doesn't mirror your own? I mean, can you think of things that you did to create father-son bonding around those activities that you were less familiar with? I mean, I'm not even sure how to ask this question. It seemed like your hands were tied behind your back because you weren't able to do the traditional things of throwing a football back and forth or playing ball or whatever the typical thing is that fathers and sons do to bond growing up. Were there other areas that you found to forge those bonds?
Yeah, sure. Games. We used to play games, board games, video games. That was the way we bonded. I never thought about it as bonding at the time. I can look back and see now, yeah, that's probably what it was. Yeah. Yeah,
and that makes perfect sense because a lot of the bonding activities that happen in stereotypically masculine father-son bondings, it has its roots in competition. It's kind of like this idea of, as the father, you recognize you will always beat your son until he grows to a certain level where he will tie you and then possibly, exceed you in whatever that performance is.
Yeah.
So father-son bonding usually comes back to that competition-based. Did you have that with your father? Was there anything as far as that bonding experience with him?
Nothing. He was working most of the time. He worked nights, so he slept days. And I remember one time going out and playing baseball with him. And of course, he was a lot bigger than I was. And he threw hard, and it hurt. And I was not going to show him that my hand was hurting from his pitching because he was throwing it really hard. And I don't know if he did that on purpose because it was coming harder than I could handle. But I was not going to let him see that I was weak in any way. I remember that and survived.
Interesting. In that moment, you were essentially proving your manhood to each other. He was showing you how strong he was, and you were
Yeah.
showing how much you could take. And that's, two very stereotypically masculine things to do.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting? And it never happened again. It was that one time, and he never picked up the ball again.
Yeah, and I'm sure after that you never wanted to ask. Who wants to go through that again?
No.
Wow. So you have you bond through different activities with your son, and then in your trying to get this timing right, in your late 30s, early 40s, you've been a Catholic all your life, which has served you to a certain degree up to that point. It gives you community, it gives you stability, it gives you structure, and then you join the charismatic movement within the Catholic Church and become a born again Christian within the Catholic structure. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, and I think it happened when I was around 20, I'm thinking 28 or 29, something like that, years of age.
I think you might have been a little older than that
You
because
think?
I think it happened when I was about
trying to-
not that much different because I think I probably was around 12 or 13 at the time.
Yeah.
So that would have made you
It was
early
it was-
30s.
Yeah, you were being confirmed. That's when it happened.
Yeah, that would have been 7th grade.
It's great.
Yeah.
So I was thinking because I remember when I was running as part of my physical activity, and I didn't start that till I was 31, and I was already running when I was considered a born again Christian. Yeah.
No, so did that more entrench you in what would have been Christian teachings or Christian ideologies, or did that affect that at all? I mean, you're as far as following church, what the church guidance was on living your life, was it as strong or more strong than it was before you were born again?
I don't. My convictions probably more so. Yeah. As far as doing things different, attended a lot more church gatherings. But as far as morality, I don't think anything changed there. Just more my perspective of who I was in the church, and I had a lot more confidence of who I was in the church.
And I believe I more strongly started to communicate my desire to. I was considering the priesthood as a career starting about that same time. Coincidentally, I mean, it may have been this desire to forge a stronger relationship with you and Mom, because I even though I didn't identify as gay or even knew what that really was at that point, I knew there was something different about me, and a large part of what I was trying to do was just trying to make myself as much like the family unit as I could. So I think it may have been something I was thinking about before, but it definitely reinforced it. But I started to speak that out loud around that point. And I'm wondering, because I did not date that much in high school. There was one girl I dated for a little over a year. But other than that, there really wasn't a whole lot of that going on. And I'm curious if my lack of exploration of women or girls at that time, whether that was written off as part of that I was contemplating a life that was devoid of sexual relationships, if that kind of allowed your brain to kind of block out the fact that I wasn't doing the stereotypical dating thing at that time, or was that even a thought?
It wasn't a thought because I was not a person that dated a lot. I rarely dated. It was mostly hanging around with the guys. We'd go out at night, talk to girls, but that was it. Most of us, the people I ran around with, we never had steady girlfriends. So it didn't seem odd to me that you didn't have girlfriends. Yeah.
So I lived at home until the summer after my senior year, and I turned 18 that summer. And at the end of that summer, I moved to San Antonio, Texas, to join a seminary there.
Right.
Was there ever any period, any point before I left home, when I was still living up and growing up at home, where there was any kind of, I think there might be something about him that is unusual as far as the typical sexuality? Was there anything that may have worked in your brain, even if you dismissed it looking back now? Was there anything during that period where you had a moment of pause of, is my son somehow not interested in women in a way that informs his sexuality?
No.
Okay. So when does that first thought occur?
I think when you told us, that was the first time that I really, yeah, oh, okay. Then I could look back and say, okay, yeah, I can see now. But yeah, maybe I didn't want to see at the time. But no, I never questioned that. I don't know.
So that came completely out of left field, because I remember I came out. I was in seminary, just for the people listening. I was in seminary for 2 years, and then left seminary when I was 20. And not too long after I left the seminary, I started to try dating men. I never, after I left the seminary, dated women. And it wasn't that I just to be clear, I was not the stereotypical story where I recognized I was gay and left the seminary. I think I had kind of come to an acceptance of that, because I went to counseling when I was in college, in seminary, and through that counseling kind of came to peace with having a gay identity, but I was still prepared to give up sex or relationships in order to pursue this calling. But I found so much hypocrisy and so much that went against my idealized notion of what the church was while I was in seminary that I couldn't do it anymore. I recognized it wasn't this holy place and holy calling that I thought it was. It was full of corruption and full of men who were willing to take advantage not only of other men, but of their flock, if you want to call it that, the parishioners, whatever. That there were people within that calling that just shattered my image of what it was going to be to live that life, and it was the hypocrisy that sent me away. That, and I was not a what they would call I was not a rebellious child.
No, not at all.
And my rebellious period kicked in at about 20. And I was like, screw you all, I'm out of here. Packed up my bags and left.
Yeah.
And that didn't go that way. But that was essentially the concept. It was like I was wanting to stay out past curfew. I was wanting to do all that stuff that I couldn't do before. But now I was in a very structured environment again. I went from being in a very protective home environment to a protective seminary environment. It's like, I need to be an adult. I need to go out and make my own decisions. In fact, I think when I left, even with the hypocrisy I was exposed to, I thought, I just need some time to do my thing, and then I may come back. But after I was out in the wide world, and I was challenged by it, but I found a way to survive it and find some identity of my own and enjoyment, and came into myself after I left the seminary. So I dated for a while, and then I was in a long-term relationship, and it was that long-term relationship I had after we were together 4 years, and then he passed away, and I was still not out to you and Mom.
Right.
And I went through an emotional crisis. I went back into therapy because I moved after he died. I moved from San Antonio to Dallas and stayed there for about 3 years. And while I was in Dallas, I went to therapy and kind of dealt with the grief and what that all meant. And while talking in therapy, I remember having a conversation with my therapist. It's like one of the many things that came up was how much it would have helped to have had family to get through that period, because I needed something to hold on to, and I was losing myself again because I just my whole world was shaped around this one person who was now gone, and now I felt abandoned and alone, and it reinforced how distanced I felt from you and my mother. And I was fortunate that while living in Dallas, my mother's youngest brother was living in Dallas, and I got to develop a relationship with him and enough comfort and security with him where I could tell him about all this stuff I was going through. And he's the one who strongly encouraged I come out to the two of you. And you came and visited while you were, at this point, living in a Catholic Christian commune.
Yes.
So your faith had become so entrenched in you that you were now living in a commune in Arkansas. And so the prospect of coming out at that point got even dicier, because it was like, if this is how Christian my parents now are, I have a very real possibility of losing my relationship entirely with them. And it wasn't like we had much of a relationship at that point anyway. There were rare calls, and I wasn't telling you anything that was really going on in my life. It was a very tenuous hold on that relationship. And I think I realized that too. I mean, that came up in therapy. It's like I wanted a real relationship with my parents, but was afraid I couldn't have one. And the only way to test that was to lay this big truth bomb and see where we go from there. So when I came out to you, the two of you at my uncle's house, where we were all visiting for the evening, I remember you or Mom at some point saying, I think you both may have said, well, we had our suspicions, but we never talked about it. It was like never a conversation the two of you had together. So I would think at some point before that coming out that there was, even if you were in denial mode, that there were like things that were coming up in your head. It was like, is this, oh no, or, maybe quickly dismissing it. So maybe that's why the memory isn't there. But I distinctly remember that being said right after I came out, that it was a suspicion that you both had, just never talked to each other about it.
I think that's probably true, and just dismissed it out of hand. No, he's not.
Yeah, and I would suspect that a large part of it was there was a fear that was the case, because there, on top of HIV/AIDS that was coming with it at that point anywhere in your realm of understanding, is that it was the sin. That whole concept of love the sinner, hate the sin. It was just this thing that I was going to have to wrestle with.
I apologize because I forgot another significant person in our life. John, I'm going to call him John P. I'm not going to put his name out there, but he was homosexual, and I knew he was also, and he happened to be related to people in the community where we lived in Arkansas. And we spent every weekend with him, Mom and I. We'd spend every weekend with him and one of the sisters, and we played cards. Loved that man, still do today. And maybe that's part of the acceptance stuff, because my two really close encounters were John P. and I know him like I know my own brother, Gail. Those two people, and loved them both. They were both really super people, and I think that helped me when I had to face it face to face, that these aren't weird people. These are normal people trying to live a life. Yeah,
and we talked about this before, that I recalled my coming out to you a little differently than you did, because I like I said, my biggest the worst case scenario was like, we cannot have you in our lives anymore. So long, good knowing you. And I also recognize if that happened, that there was still a possibility after you had time to ruminate on it that we would, somehow reconnect, because that was the story that I'd heard, parents shunning their children and then missing them and, trying to reforge a bond. It's like, okay, so that's around the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is like, oh, we love you anyway. And that was the response I got. I got the "we love you anyway." There was hugs, there was tears on my part. You guys were strong and held it all together. I was a puddle, but and I remember just getting the message of we love you. And you recalled the part where you said, "We love you, but we can't support the lifestyle.
Yeah,
we can't condone the lifestyle."
The lifestyle, yeah.
And just for anybody listening, strike gay lifestyle out of your vocabulary, because there is no gay lifestyle. There are, millions of ways of being a gay male in the world. There is no one lifestyle that goes along with being gay, and there's no sexual act that goes along with being gay. Whatever your preconceptions of gay is all tied up in a lot of mythology. And if you want to know what a gay person is, you should probably do your research or meet one. And meeting one isn't meeting all of them.
Exactly.
There's a wide variety of gay experience.
As I found out later.
Yeah, and you did, and that is to your credit. And I do think it was a catharsis. It was a turning point in our relationship. It was I've said before, I've said this in therapy many, many times, but when I was growing up, I did not feel my parents' love was unconditional. And that had to do with this kernel of who I was, that even though I didn't know what it was, I was afraid of it showing and revealing that I was somebody who was unworthy of love. And so everything I did was to ensure that I got my parents' love, because part of getting your parents' love is getting their protection. We all need parents to feel secure. And if we lose our parents' love, then we lose that security. So it's all tied up in survival. It's like, my parents must love me and I must do whatever I can to make them love me. But I never believed my parents' love was unconditional until after I came out and could still and then experience what I thought was true love at that point, because I recognized that it was, even though I didn't remember you saying lifestyle, I recognized that it was a challenge to leap from having what you assumed was a heteronormative son into having a gay son. And this was an understanding that I did not come to until well after I came out. And this has been said before, and I wish I could remember who said it, but gay people through their journey go through a lifetime of getting to, it feels like a lifetime. It's a whole heterosexual lifetime to get to the point where they can accept the fact that they are gay and start telling people about it. There's plenty that comes before that moment where you have to become secure in that identity. And then that is part of your life. When you come out to somebody else, they have to start from the point of, I thought you were somebody else. And they have to make that whole transition that you have made years, that took you years to come to. So to have a little patience, I guess, for the people who are getting this information for the first time. And I've heard that a common reaction to children or a loved one coming out is, why didn't you tell me before? What was, well, the confidence wasn't there. The understanding of the self wasn't there. Because once you start talking to somebody about who you are, there's a whole bunch of questions. And it's are you sure that's what you are? And you kind of have to be at the point where you are sure before you express any identity that goes against what came before. If you come up in a Republican family and you're like, I'm a Democrat, you want to make sure you really are a Democrat before you. Otherwise, you're one of those people who are just saying things to get under people's skins. And then it's less of an identity and it's more of a relationship test. Can you love me even knowing this thing, which I'm not really confident about, but I want to test it. I want to poke at it. And I don't know of any gay people who are who are using their gay identity to test their parents. They very well may, but I think for most gay people, it's like, I have to come to a point of whatever that response is, I can live with it. And that's a hard thing to come to. And I feel badly for those gay youth that are outed or something happens where their parents find out before they're even ready to deal with it themselves. And that kind of adds more stigma to their identity. It makes it harder to be a gay adult, having had that kind of rejection at a point when you weren't prepared for it. I mean, I know I would have struggled with your rejection, but I was prepared for rejection by the point that I came out, and I was lucky to be able to have that moment myself instead of having it thrust upon me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I wonder, the comment as we were sitting there talking, we've talked about this before, that possibly just a knee-jerk reaction because of where we were
Yep.
in the church at that point. And I don't know that I really meant it, but that's because it really didn't follow through that way. So, yeah.
So let's say that's when your clock starts for having a gay son.
Right.
Before that, you did not have a gay son.
Right.
So what's that evolution from having a gay 26-year-old son? What's that? How does that enter into your consciousness? I mean, there has to be like that evening. That's something that's going on in your head. Is like, what's all this about? But then, again, my clock started well before yours did. Your clock starts at that point of having a gay person in your family.
Right.
Where does that take you?
Well, we talked a lot about what being gay was, and obviously we didn't know. All we've been told is by the church that it's wrong, it's evil, or whatever they had to say. So, in order to maintain that relationship, we had to kind of say we need to put that behind us. We need to figure out how we proceed now with this relationship. Well, the only thing we could come up with, we just love him and try to enter into this journey with him and see what happens. And we're not going to go anywhere. We're not going to leave him. So let's just see what happens.
Yeah, that sounds easy. Let's put this behind us. How would you counsel particularly a religious-minded parent whose child has come out and to put behind them their church's teaching on that particular subject? What's the thing that has to happen to make that possible?
I am not that wise to tell somebody else how they should react to somebody. As far as we're concerned, the love has to overcome what's they're being taught. You need to look at and be critical of what they're telling you. It's not honest. Without venturing in and taking that journey, we had no idea where we were going when we started that journey with you. The church is telling us it's wrong, it's evil, but we decided to take this journey anyway. And because we love you, and we're not going to take a chance on losing that connection. So we let you pretty much do the leading on this. And we looked, did some research. They didn't have the computer stuff that you got nowadays. Now we have. Basically, there was no web. So it was just kind of hoping that you would help lead us through this thing, and you did a great job of doing that.
Is it for those gay people who have come out to their parents who are kind of walking this path? I mean, is there particular information that you think might be most useful for parents to have who haven't had to think about this? I mean, what helps either alleviate concerns or normalize it? Or, I mean, I know it's going to be different for everybody, but as far as, you are a subject matter expert now on this. You are a gay parent who has successfully navigated through that process.
Well, I'll tell you what, what I would suggest, and it's going to be hard for people, it wasn't for me, because we were willing to move on this journey to get a closer relationship with you. And we met your community in California. That was an eye-opener. You had, I don't know, a party had at least 30, 40 people there. And I remember talking to practically everybody there. And my life at that point changed again. It was almost like having a conversion experience again. And it was like, instead of going in the Christian way, it was looking at the real way the world works, and who the gay community is, where their struggles were. I talked to other military guys since I was in the military. Talked to one of the guys that were there, and he told me about how he had to hide his sexuality when he was in the military, and could come out on his own then afterwards and live the life that he really wanted to live that he couldn't do in the service. Talked to some of the female impersonators, and we just got to love them. I mean, they were great people. My daughter, your sister, was with us, and she just fell in love with them. And they took her somewhere and kind of dressed her up and like a doll. But yeah, it was a fun time. It was pretty neat. And like I said, I talked about just about everybody there.
So is is that when it all boils down for you? I mean, is that it's kind of the fear of the unknown is what creates that distance? It's like I don't know what any of this is. It's scary to me, and that it's just getting past.
I think it's just I don't want to know. I mean, why did I want to know? I had no.
Before I came out.
Yeah. There was no need to say I'm going to take this journey. There was nowhere to go. Now there's a destination. It's like, okay, we're going to find out what this is all about. Excuse me. Find out what this is all about, and not so much in those words, but this is the way we chose to do it. And join into your lifestyle, find out what it's all about, and never look back.
That's actually a great point, because I know late 80s, early 90s, when the HIV/AIDS pandemic was ramping up and at its worst, there was a lot of encouragement within the gay community to come out. I mean, there's a lot of encouragement to come out. In fact, there's a National Coming Out Day now, and the whole concept is that it's that fear that kept people from coming to our aid when our community was dying, that they could turn a blind eye because they didn't have to understand and thought we brought this upon ourselves and that we were somehow suspect, or I hate to use the word evil, but somehow, we brought that on ourselves with our sin. And if you came out, then, I mean, I think at this point, you would be hard pressed to find somebody who has not met an openly gay person, and many of them would be members of their family, or at least they know a member of their family. It's harder and harder to go through life without knowing somebody who is, and knowing somebody who is makes it harder to hate them. I mean, there are some people who can isolate individuals and go, yes, I know an individual and I love them, but the rest of them are, and that's a special kind of person who can do that kind of isolation. This is one of the good ones, but people do that. I mean, they do that with people of different races as well. Like I don't like black people, but I have this black person I work with, and they're one of the good ones. They can somehow separate that out and live with that disconnect. And I think that for me, knowing how much of an evolution your thought process took after I came out, and how that's kind of made you a gay advocate. I'm kind of curious what how this impacted your relationship with other people of faith, right? As you were going through this process. I mean, you had to have heard negative messaging. I know for a fact, when I came and visited you at the commune, you heard some negative messaging. So how does that get integrated into this whole journey you're taking? How is for somebody who has to put that thing behind them, like you said, how do they, I think it challenged your faith a little bit. I mean, and there are some people who want to hold on to that faith even after just putting that one thing behind them. What was your personal journey with that? You were in a very unique situation.
Oh, yeah. The leader of the community, he sat me down and we talked about it because Mom had told him, so we talked about it and had some disagreement on you know, he said, well, you know, you can't accept that lifestyle that he has chose to live. And I said, that's my son. And I said, you don't understand that. You don't have a relationship with somebody who's gay. So I can tell you how I'm going to deal with it, and you deal with it the way you want. And yeah, the distance started forming between us at that point. And eventually I ended up having to leave the community because I disagreed with most of what they were talking about. And he misused his position and would preach off of the altar when he knew that you were gay, and would make derogatory comments towards the gay community. And I know you were there for one of them, and you were visibly upset, and I don't blame you. It upset all of us. And John P. was there too, and he was upset about it. So, yeah, it was a situation that couldn't go on. There was no way.
So how do you navigate that with people who may intersect with your life now that express that kind of judgmental rhetoric around gays and sin and all that?
Yeah, I haven't encountered that. We pretty much left the church, so we don't attend church anymore. I just can't, and for many reasons. And the gay part of it is one of them. And there's other reasons we left. But.
Now, I know growing up you identified as a Republican, and somewhere along the way you converted to Democrat.
Right.
And not that that's indicative of anything, but I think you consider yourself now more a liberal than a conservative, and you kind of have adopted this open-minded view of the world around you that, you know, maybe, and it kind of those things you didn't have to look at, you've chosen to look at through what you've decided to expose yourself to. And I know one of the things that you have done is joined HRC, and you keep up on the news regarding that. I've joked with friends that I think my dad knows more about gay people than I do, because, you know, you've actually done research in it, where I've just had the lived experience and, you know, from the community that I'm in, gotten information that way. So you have, I think, more of a world perspective on gays, and I think that's fascinating. But as far as any of the information that you have or resources you've been exposed to, is there anything you would recommend somebody either on the journey of accepting having a gay member in their family, or just wanting to be a stronger ally? Are there things that you would recommend that they do to kind of put themselves in a better position, either through knowledge or, you know, any recommendations?
The only thing I could do is tell them what I've done, you know, and that's what we've done. They need to take that walk along with that person they love. If they don't do that, it's hard for me to understand how you can say I love that person and want to have a relationship and then say I'm not going to walk along with you. I think that's inconsistent, and we chose to walk the walk. So, and I would highly recommend that if you really love somebody, that you take that walk with them.
I don't think that there's anything better to say than that. That sounds like a really great place to stop. So I appreciate the time that you've spent talking about this and walking us along your journey. And personally, I'm appreciative of the fact that that was a journey you wanted to take. And I can only say from my personal experience that being open and honest with the people you love about who you are, when you are in a safe place to do that, is probably one of the best decisions you can make for yourself. And I know for a lot of people it can be a scary proposition to be that open and raw about something that could be potentially be that challenging. But again, it's if what you're wanting is unconditional love in your life from the people that are in your life, you have to give them the opportunity to show you that. And I can only hope that if you're listening and that's something that you decide to do, that you have just as good of an experience with it that I did. And it doesn't make it any easier to do, but it's as I said before, I think it would have been much better for me to know whether or not I had that than keep wondering and living a lie.
I agree.
All right. So thank you again. That was my father, who spent the last hour talking with us about his experience of having a gay son, and some about having his experience of masculinity growing up. And I encourage you to check out the website, daddyrob.com. Check out the YouTube videos at Daddy Rob. Check wherever you found this audio broadcast for the links. And if you want to get a hold of me, I am the Daddy Rob at Twitter. My Twitter handle is at @TheDaddyRob. You can reach me via email at daddyrob@daddyrob.com. And until we talk again, remember your daddy loves you, and take good care of your health, mental and otherwise.